Before dawn had finished lifting off the Arizona hills, Samuel Pike watched the rancher's wife kneel in the dust outside a cabin hidden just over the New Mexico line. A boy of about 10 pulled open the door, saw Ruth Vale, and ran at her hard enough to knock the breath from both of them. "Mama," he said. 2 little girls came after him. Ruth dropped to her knees and gathered all 3 children against her, as if she had been holding herself together for weeks only so she could fall apart there. From the brush where Harlan Vale had sent him to spy, Samuel heard the boys cough, the girls laughing and crying in the same breath, and an older woman inside whisper, "You should not have come today." Harlan had expected whiskey, cards, or another man. Samuel had expected something shameful too. But there was no shame in that yard. Only danger, hunger, and the kind of love people practice in secret when the world has made room for it nowhere else. Ruth opened her saddlebags. Biscuits, dried apples, salve, 2 school tablets tied with string. She touched the boy's forehead, gave him medicine from a spoon, checked one girl's cracked hands, then turned at the faint sound of Samuel's boot on stone. She took the shotgun from beside the door and leveled it with both hands. "Come out," she said. Samuel stepped from the brush slowly. Frost cracked under his boots. The boy moved in front of the girls without being told. Ruth's voice did not shake. "Did my husband send you? He sent me to see where you rode." "Then you've seen enough." The older woman in the doorway looked as if fear had been pressing on her face for years. Ruth did not look frightened. She looked like a woman who had accepted fear as weather. "If you mean to tell him," she said, "do it quick. I would rather hear the bullet than the waiting." Samuel glanced from the shotgun to the children clutching her skirt. "Who are they?" Ruth's jaw tightened. "The reason I still breathe. Before we go farther, settle in wherever you are tonight and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. It is a comfort to know how many kitchens, porches, and lamplit rooms are sharing the same story." Samuel Pike had been on the Voss Ranch 22 days. Long enough to know Harlan Vale liked power in every form that could be counted. Acres, cattle, men who tipped their hats too fast, women who spoke too little, water rights that left smaller families begging. Long enough to know Ruth Vale moved through the big stone house like a woman serving a sentence with good manners. She never complained. She never argued. But Samuel had seen her step into a corral with a black colt that had blood and wire in its flank, while 3 grown hands stayed safely outside the rails. Ruth had spoken to the horse the way people speak to the grieving. Low, patient, without foolish cheer. The colt had stopped shaking under her hand. Samuel had not forgotten it. The night before, Harlan had poured whiskey and said, "My wife rides light every Thursday and comes back with less in the saddlebags. See where it goes. If it is foolishness, stop it. If it is betrayal, bring me the name." Now Samuel knew the name Harlan wanted was not a lover's. "Will he kill them?" Samuel asked. Ruth held his eyes. "He'll make it legal first." The words went through him like sleet. Men like Harlan did not need to rage when paper could do the work cleaner. Samuel looked at the children one more time. The boy was pale with fever. One girl had a patch on her dress where the fabric had worn through. The older woman had the look of somebody calculating whether one visitor meant food or ruin. "I saw nothing worth carrying back," Samuel said. Ruth did not lower the shotgun. "That was a foolish choice, Mr. Pike." "Likely. Then God help you too." That was the moment the world changed for both of them. A stranger can witness sorrow and still ride away clean. But once he chooses silence over safety, he belongs to the consequence of it. Harlan was waiting on the gallery when Samuel returned. Coffee in one hand, suspicion in the other. "Well," he asked. Samuel swung down from the saddle. Widow over the line with 3 children. Boy's got a chest cough. Mrs. Voss took food and school tablets. No man. No whiskey. Just need. Harlan's face did not soften. Need costs money. So does a conscience. A slow smile touched Harlan's mouth. "Careful, Pike. People mistake softness for virtue every day out here." At breakfast, Ruth did not look at Samuel once. That told him Harlan had asked and the danger around her was older than this morning. She came to him after sundown while the yard went blue and the horses settled into hay. "If you are going to ask questions," she said, "walk with me where walls cannot hear." They went to the dry wash behind the cottonwoods. Ruth did not tell the story from the beginning. Hurt people almost never do. "My first husband was Eli Mercer," she said. "He held a small sheep place east of Lordsburg. Harlan wanted the spring on that land. Eli would not sell. One night, the barn burned. Eli died inside. I was told our baby died before dawn. A month later, Harlan arrived with condolences and papers. He said Eli owed him. He said a widow could not hold land alone. Samuel listened. Then Cora found me. Ruth looked toward the dark east where the cabin lay hidden. Eli's sister. She had pulled my son from the smoke when the roof came down. She heard Harlan's men arguing outside about witnesses, so she fled with the child. She was certain Harlan had arranged the fire. So was I. Samuel stopped walking. And you married him? Ruth let out a dry breath. He told me if I became his wife, he would stop looking for the child Cora had stolen from me. He told me if I refused, accidents followed children in wild country. So yes, I married the man I believed killed my husband because I had one son left and no proof strong enough to protect him. The wash seemed to go colder around them. The girls are Cora's, Ruth said. Their father died in a mine collapse near Silver City. We've been what was left for one another. Caleb is 10 now. He knows me as his mother only in pieces. Thursdays. Biscuits. Books. Braids in the girl's hair. That is what Harlan's mercy has looked like for 5 years. Samuel had known hard winters and mean bosses. This was worse. This was a slow theft dressed in decent clothes. Why not go to the sheriff? The sheriff drinks Harlan's whiskey. The banker marries his kin. The clerk copies whatever Harlan places beneath his nose. Rich men do not need to own the law. They only need it accustomed to them. They walked a little farther. At last Samuel said, "You should leave the ranch. Take them west. Change names again." Ruth shook her head. "Running teaches cruel men they were right to chase. And besides, I stayed alive for more than hiding." "For what, then?" She looked at him in the near dark. "For a day when I could ruin him so completely he would understand what waiting feels like." That answer stayed in Samuel's chest. The next days tightened around the ranch. Harlan watched Ruth with false carelessness. The hands noticed. At the mercantile, Mrs. Odom asked too sweetly whether Mrs. Voss had been poorly. At the smithy, somebody mentioned riders seen near the eastern line. Even the cook went quiet when Harlan entered a room. Samuel learned more from the ledgers than he had from conversation. Old Tomas, Harlan's bookkeeper, left them open on the office desk one dusk and said, without looking up, "Invisible women survive by counting better than proud men." That is all I will say. In the household pages Samuel found pennies shaved from lamp oil, flour, soap, cloth. Tiny amounts, each nothing. Together enough to keep 4 extra mouths alive. Ruth had hidden a future inside arithmetic. That night Harlan drank with cattle buyers and said, too casually, "There are cheap widow claims over the line. Some folks need reminding what they can hold and what they cannot." Ruth's spoon struck her plate once, sharp as flint. After the buyers left, she found Samuel by the smokehouse and pressed a folded paper into his hand. It was her marriage certificate to Eli Mercer. "If anything happens to me," she said, "give that to Caleb." Samuel looked up. "Why now?" "Because Harlan opened my desk this morning and shut it before I reached the room. He has stopped pretending not to search." "Come away tonight," Samuel said. "Take the children and go farther than his pride can ride." Ruth's expression hardened. "No, I kept more than food from him. I kept copies, land letters, brand transfers, payments. He set books under my hands for years because he believed a wife was furniture. If he moves against my son, I will use every page." The following evening Harlan gathered the men and announced he was riding at first light to settle cattle trouble near the eastern line. He never looked at Ruth while he spoke. That was how Samuel knew it had nothing to do with cattle. When the hands drifted away, he found Ruth standing at the trough with both palms flat on the wet wood. "He knows," Samuel said. "Enough. Then tell me plain what you want me to do." She looked up. Fear was there at last, but so was steel. "If you stay near this story, you may die in it." Samuel thought of Kansas. Of the wagon where his wife had labored while he rode for a doctor through floodwater instead of staying with her. By the time he returned, she and the baby were gone. He had spent 6 years mistaking motion for penance. "I rode away once when staying might have mattered," he said. "I will not do it again." If you were standing where he stood, with innocent lives at one end of the truth and a powerful man at the other, what would you do? Would you speak at once and pray, or hold your tongue until you had a way to win? Tell me in the comments. Ruth gave one short nod. It felt less like thanks than enlistment. Before sunrise, Harlan moved first. Young Mateo came pounding on Samuel's bunkhouse door barefoot, breath smoking in the dark. "Mr. Voss locked Mrs. Voss upstairs," he gasped. "Tomas says the riders are saddling." Samuel was in his boots before the boy finished talking. He cut across the yard just as Harlan came down the gallery buckling his gun belt. Two strangers with carbines stood behind him. "Let her out," Samuel said. Harlan smiled. Domestic matters need not concern payroll. 3 hard knocks sounded from an upstairs window. Samuel shifted his weight. One stranger reached for his rifle. Mateo froze by the pump. Then glass shattered above them. Ruth came through the window in a rain of shards, dropped to the porch roof, slid, caught the gutter, and landed badly but upright. Blood ran down one cheek. The office key ring flashed in her hand. "Ledger drawer," she shouted, throwing the keys to Samuel. "False bottom. Ride." Harlan lunged for her. Samuel drove into him shoulder first. They hit the dirt hard. Harlan fought heavy and vicious. He jammed an elbow into Samuel's mouth and went for his revolver. Samuel caught his wrist. Ruth did not wait for either man to win. She ran for the stable. Samuel tore free, snatched the keys, and sprinted through the office. The false bottom held receipts, deeds, bank drafts, and letters in Harlan's own hand. He shoved the packet under his coat. When he came back into the yard, Ruth was on a gray mare with no saddle. Harlan had a shotgun aimed not at her, but at Mateo. "Get down," he said, "or the boy dies in your place." The yard went still. Ruth looked at Mateo. Samuel saw the terrible arithmetic pass across her face. The child before her, the 3 children east of the line, the years already paid to keep them alive. So Samuel broke the moment before it broke her. He fired. The bullet smashed through the shotgun stock and knocked the blast wide. Mateo dropped flat, alive. Ruth drove the gray through the gate and vanished in dust. After her, Harlan roared. The ride east was all hoof thunder and bad breath. Samuel knew Ruth would go to the cabin. Harlan knew it too. They crossed the wash, tore up a red ridge, and dropped into the gray basin leading toward the territorial line. Once Samuel looked across and saw Harlan gaining, face blank with the concentration of a man finally done pretending to be civilized. Ruth reached the cabin first. Samuel saw her leap from the mare, shove open the door, and gather Cora and the children into motion. Caleb stumbled, coughing, while the girls clung to their aunt's skirt. Ruth pointed them toward the arroyo behind the cabin. Then the first rider opened fire. Mud burst from the wall. Cora screamed and dragged the girls low. Caleb tried to turn back. Samuel hit the ground running, caught the boy by the coat, and rolled him behind a rain barrel as a bullet punched through the wood. Ruth fired from the doorway with a double barrel and dropped one horse under its rider. She did not shoot like a lady. She shot like a mother who had spent years rehearsing this hour in her bones. Harlan circled wide, looking for the ending. "Ruth," he called, "bring me the boy and I'll let the girls live." She answered with the second barrel. Samuel shoved Caleb toward the arroyo. "Take your aunt and the girls north through the rocks. Stay low till the cottonwoods." "What about my ma?" the boy cried. Samuel looked at him once. "Your ma is busy teaching a lesson. Go." Caleb ran. Samuel made the cabin window while bullets stitched dust at his heels. He landed inside beside Ruth as she broke the shotgun open on emptiness. "They're clear to the wash," he said. "Good." She grabbed fresh shells from the table. "Those papers can bury him, if we live long enough to read them." Her eyes flashed. "I am tired of living only enough not to die." That was the revelation at the heart of her. Not patience, not endurance. The strength that saves a life is often the moment a frightened person decides fear no longer gets the final vote. A lantern smashed against the back wall. Flame climbed the dry boards. Smoke rolled under the rafters. Outside, Harlan's voice came through the heat. "Last chance, Ruth. Walk out now, and the boy grows up on my south range instead of in the ground." She set the empty shotgun down. "You already stole one husband from me," she said. "You don't get my son." Then she kicked open the rear door into smoke and fire. Samuel went with her. They ran for the arroyo while the cabin burned behind them. A bullet struck Samuel high in the shoulder and spun him half around. Ruth grabbed his coat and hauled him the last yards into the wash where Cora had the children hidden under an overhang of stone. Above them, riders spread along the rim. Smoke turned the morning bitter. Caleb clutched a little carved horse so tightly his hand shook. Nell and Ivy buried their faces against Cora. Ruth crouched beside Samuel, chest heaving, eyes bright with ash and fury. Harlan stepped near the edge. "When I drag you out," he called smoothly, "I will make the boy watch what loyalty costs." Samuel reached for his rifle. Ruth laid her palm over the barrel. "Not yet," she whispered. And there, with fire behind them and rock at their backs, the whole world seemed to hold one long breath. Full dark gave them a chance the daylight never would. Ruth led the others through a limestone cut she knew from childhood, sheep drives, too narrow for mounted men. Half a mile in, they found a cave with a spring dripping cold into a stone basin. The first thing Ruth did was bind Samuel's shoulder with strips torn from her own petticoat. The children huddled beneath Cora's blanket. Caleb finally slept with the carved horse under his chin. Every so often one of the girls whimpered and Ruth would pause, touch her hair, and go back to the bandage. For a long while there was only the drip of water and the distant barking of men searching the wrong ravines. At last Ruth sat back on her heels. "Why did you stay?" she asked. He knew she meant more than the ride. "My wife died while I was away trying to do the useful thing instead of the needed one," he said. Useful was the doctor. Needed was not leaving her afraid. "I have been answering for that mistake ever since." Ruth lowered her eyes to the blood on her hands. "Then perhaps we are alike. I have spent 5 years calling scraps enough because scraps were safe." Were they? She looked at the sleeping children. No, they were only survivable. The words sat between them like a truth too old to argue with. Caleb stirred and reached for her in his sleep. She took his hand at once. Without opening his eyes, he whispered, "You always smell like home, even when you leave." Samuel turned his face away, because some tendernesses are almost too sacred to witness. Later Ruth came back, carrying the crooked carved horse. "He made this in spring and cried because the leg came out wrong," she said. Eli used to tell him crooked things last longer because they've already learned disappointment. Samuel rolled the little horse in his palm. One bad leg. Smooth body polished by small fingers. Ruth tucked it into his coat pocket over the evidence bundle. "If you die tonight, I expect you to haunt me unbearable." He met her eyes. "You drive a hard bargain, Mrs. Voss." "Mercer," she said softly. "In here, where he cannot hear me, Mercer." Sometimes the line people remember longest is not the grand one. It is the quiet one. A name can be a room. A true name can be the last room a cruel person cannot enter. Near midnight, Tomas found them. Alone, with a mule, 2 water skins, and an envelope sealed in wax. "Your husband searches like a rich man," he muttered. Wide, loud, and stupid. He handed Ruth the envelope. "Bank copies. Railroad payments. Enough to wake officials who sleep through ordinary evil. Judge Calder hears claims in Bowie tomorrow. Put the truth in a room with witnesses and Harlan's power gets smaller by the minute." "Why help us?" Ruth asked. Tomas shrugged. "Because I am old, and old men eventually choose whether they will die as furniture or as men." After he left, Ruth sat beside Samuel with the envelope across her lap. Fear was still there, but it no longer had the whole field. She said, almost to herself, "Strange how the things you've given up on find you in the dark." If this part of the story is reaching you, then it was written for exactly that place in you. A like, a kind word, a subscription if you feel moved to offer it. Those things tell us to keep bringing these people to the fire. They reached Bowie just before noon. The railroad claim hearing was being held in the long room above the mercantile. Ranchers, widows, speculators, and town busybodies packed the benches. Judge Calder sat at the front while Harlan Voss, fresh-collared and confident, prepared to speak about acreage as though murder were only another management detail. The door opened. Ruth walked in first. Samuel came at one shoulder, bandaged and armed. Cora came at the other. Behind them were Caleb, Nell, and Ivy in their cleanest borrowed clothes. Conversation broke apart all over the room. Harlan turned and went still. "My wife is unwell," he said too quickly. "This is no place for dramatics." Ruth kept walking until she stood square in the center of the floor. "No," she said. "It is a place for records. That will do nicely." She laid the marriage certificate on the judge's table first, then Eli's deed, then the bank drafts, brand transfers, extortion letters, and copies Tomas had kept of Harlan's private instructions. Paper by paper, the room changed sides. 5 years ago, Ruth said, and every person there heard her, My husband Eli Mercer died in a barn fire after refusing to sell his spring to Harlan Voss. I was told my son died that same night. He did not. My sister by marriage saved him and fled because she heard Voss's men discussing whether witnesses remained. Mr. Voss then forced my marriage by threatening the life of that child if I refused. While he believed me decorative, he set ledgers and letters under my hands. I learned them. I copied them. Today I am done keeping his secrets alive. Harlan gave a hard laugh. A grieving woman's tale. Pike, tell them. Samuel stepped forward. I saw him ride armed to the cabin where her son was hidden. I saw his men burn that cabin. I saw him level a shotgun at a ranch boy to force Mrs. Mercer from her horse. If the court wants the names of hands who watched him lock her upstairs before the ride, they can have them before dinner. Mateo's voice came from the back. I heard it too. People turned. The boy stood in the doorway twisting his hat, terrified but steady. Beside him was Tomas, very much not furniture. Then Caleb walked to the front, set his crooked little horse on the table, and said, with all the raw old waiting in him, my ma came every Thursday till he found out. There are moments when a room decides what kind of place it will be from then on. This was one. Judge Calder removed his spectacles. Sheriff, he said, stand Mr. Voss where I can see his hands. Then send for the territorial marshal and seize every ledger from the Voss office before a page goes missing. Harlan went for his revolver anyway. He had underestimated Ruth once. He made the same mistake in public. She caught his wrist before the gun cleared leather, turned with the same calm force she used on frightened horses, and drove him hard into the claims table. Papers flew. The revolver skidded. Samuel pinned him while the sheriff clapped irons on his wrists in front of half the county. Harlan twisted beneath them, red with shock more than rage. You owe me everything, he spat at Ruth. She looked down at him with a calm so complete it felt holy. No, I was paying for survival. We are settled now. The collapse came fast after that. The railroad suspended his claim before the hearing ended. The bank called his notes by evening. Tomas's ledgers proved tax fraud, brand laundering, and extortion against smallholders. 2 former riders chose testimony over prison and described the Mercer fire well enough to finish what Ruth had begun. By the end of the week, Harlan Voss had lost his ranch, his accounts, his standing, and the illusion that power could outlive proof. Justice did not come elegant. It came itemized. Eli Mercer's spring claim was restored to Caleb as surviving heir, with Ruth as guardian until he came of age. Cora cried when the order was read. Ruth did not. She only laid her hand on Caleb's head and closed her eyes like a woman hearing a church bell after a very long storm. The town shifted too. Mrs. Odom sent quilts. The blacksmith repaired Cora's wagon for free. Mateo's mother brought broth for Samuel's shoulder. Samuel stayed through the legal sorting, then through spring branding, then through the first full Ruth gentled on the restored Mercer place. One evening, with the children chasing fireflies by the spring and Cora calling them in for supper, he found Ruth by the corral fence watching a colt nudge its mother. I have been walking for years, he said. If there is room here for a man who knows cattle, fixes fences badly, and is still learning the difference between useful and needed, I would count it a mercy. Ruth rested one hand on the rail. She looked at him a long moment. Then she said, Stay? We have all had enough leaving. By September, the cottonwoods along the spring had begun to yellow. Caleb carried feed like a boy proud to be growing into his own bones. Nell and Ivy practiced sums on the tablets Ruth used to smuggle in her saddlebags. Cora sang while hanging laundry. Samuel's shoulders still ached in rain, but it ached on land that no longer belonged to fear. One evening, warm as bread, the children ran in from the spring house with peaches tucked in their shirts, and Ruth came down from the barn carrying a lantern. She set it on the fence post between herself and Samuel, looked out over the watered grass, and said, Hard roads do not stay hard all the way. Sometimes they carry you exactly where your life was trying to go. Beyond her, the horses moved through the gold dusk like dark blessings under a settling sky. Next time, I'll tell you about the deaf woman sent to a winter ranch because her own family was ashamed of her, and the half-blind horse doctor who was the first man to understand every word she never said.